Have you ever wondered, what if the very thing you're most proud of is slowly working against you? Most people would never question being nice. After all, niceness is praised, it's encouraged, it's something we're told makes us good human beings. But today's story asks a different question, a quieter one, a more uncomfortable one. What if always being nice isn't protecting you the way you think it is? Welcome to An Amazing Storyteller. This is a place for real stories, real human behavior, and honest reflections about everyday life. If you've ever felt tired even though you try your best, if you've ever wondered why doing the right thing still leaves you feeling unseen or unappreciated, this story might feel familiar. You don't need to agree with everything you hear. Just listen. And if at any point you recognize yourself in this story, you're not alone. You can quietly tap like or leave a comment later if something resonates with you. This isn't a story about being rude. It isn't about becoming cold or selfish. It's about understanding how a certain version of niceness slowly shapes a life, often without the person realizing it. The kind of niceness that doesn't announce itself loudly. The kind that feels polite, responsible, mature. The kind that begins very early, long before anyone questions it. And that's where this story truly begins. For many people, being nice doesn't begin as a decision. It begins as a lesson. Long before adulthood, long before careers or relationships, there is a quiet understanding that forms early in life. When you behave, you're praised. When you stay quiet, you're appreciated. When you adjust, when you agree, when you don't create trouble, things feel smoother. Adults smile more. Tension disappears faster. Approval feels warm and reassuring. Slowly, a connection is made. Being nice feels safe. Not because anyone explains it out loud, but because the environment rewards it. You learn that saying "it's okay" keeps the peace, that giving up your turn avoids conflict, that understanding others is more important than being understood yourself. At first, it feels like maturity, like emotional intelligence, like becoming someone people like having around. And in many ways, it works. You become dependable, easy to deal with, someone who doesn't complain. But what often goes unnoticed is that this version of being good doesn't ask one important question. What do you actually need? Because early on, niceness isn't taught as a choice. It's taught as a rule. A rule that says, don't upset people, don't disappoint, don't make things difficult. And when those rules are followed for long enough, they stop feeling like rules at all. They start to feel like who you are. As time passes, something subtle begins to happen. Niceness stops being something you choose. It becomes something you do automatically. You don't pause to think before agreeing. You don't weigh options carefully before adjusting. Your response comes quickly, almost instinctively. Yes, that's fine. No problem. I can manage. These phrases slip out easily. They feel harmless. They keep things moving. Saying yes feels lighter than explaining no. Agreeing feels easier than risking misunderstanding. And in a world that already feels complicated, simplicity feels like a relief. At first, this habit looks like strength. You're adaptable, flexible, reliable. People start describing you in predictable ways. Easy to work with, very understanding, always helpful. And there's a quiet pride in that. But habits have a way of shaping lives without ever asking permission. Each small agreement trains the mind to ignore a small discomfort. Each avoided pause teaches you that your hesitation isn't important. Over time, the question, "Do I want this?" is asked less and less. Not because the answer doesn't matter, but because the habit answers for you. And when a habit runs deep enough, it stops feeling like something you're doing. It starts feeling like something you are. For a long time, niceness feels like kindness. They look similar from the outside. Both are polite, both avoid harm, both seem rooted in care. But slowly, the difference begins to matter. Kindness comes from a place of choice. It's deliberate. It has weight behind it. Niceness, on the other hand, often comes from avoidance. Avoiding conflict, avoiding disappointment, avoiding the discomfort of being misunderstood. The two get mixed up because they wear the same face. A kind person can say yes, but they can also say no when it's needed. A nice person says yes even when something inside feels tight and uneasy. And over time, the body notices this difference before the mind does. There's a quiet tension that shows up, a slight heaviness after agreeing, a faint irritation that has no clear target. But because niceness has always been praised, these signals are ignored. After all, being nice is supposed to feel good. So when it doesn't, the assumption is simple. Something must be wrong with me. And instead of questioning the habit, many people double down on it. They try to be even nicer, even more understanding, even more patient, not realizing that kindness doesn't require self-erasure, but niceness often does. For many people, the workplace is where niceness becomes most visible. At first, it looks like dedication, staying a little later, helping a teammate finish their task, taking on just one more thing to keep things running smoothly. It feels responsible. It feels professional. And in the beginning, it even feels rewarding. You don't want to be the difficult one. You don't want to say no when others are stressed. So you adjust your schedule, you stretch your energy, you tell yourself it's temporary. And people notice, at least at first. You're described as dependable, someone who can be counted on, someone who doesn't complain. But slowly, the meaning of your effort begins to change. Extra work stops being seen as help and starts being seen as availability. Staying late stops being appreciated and starts being expected. And because you've never made a fuss before, no one thinks to ask if it's still okay. You notice the tiredness first, then the quiet frustration. But you push it aside, telling yourself this is just how work is. After all, being nice has always worked before. So you keep doing what you've always done, even as the cost quietly increases. The change doesn't happen all at once. That's why it's easy to miss. No one suddenly becomes unkind. No one openly takes advantage. Instead, the tone shifts quietly. Requests become shorter. Thank yous become rare. Tasks are assigned without explanation. Your effort is no longer noticed. It's assumed. Meetings move forward without your input. Decisions are made around you, not with you. And somehow your flexibility has turned invisible. You start to feel it in small moments, when your time is taken for granted, when your boundaries are crossed without apology, when your name is mentioned only when something needs to be done. And yet, saying something feels uncomfortable. After all, nothing bad has happened. There's no obvious injustice to point to, just a growing sense that your presence is valued more for what you give than for who you are. So you stay quiet. You remind yourself to be understanding. You tell yourself others are just busy. You wait for things to improve on their own. But respect rarely returns on its own. It responds to clarity. And clarity is the one thing niceness avoids. Outwardly, everything still looks fine. You agree when asked. You nod along in conversations. You keep your voice steady and polite. But inside, something feels different. There's a quiet resistance that appears the moment you say yes. A tightening in the chest. A heaviness that lingers longer than it should. You replay conversations in your mind, not because you want conflict, but because a part of you knows you didn't speak honestly. And yet, speaking up still feels risky. What if you disappoint someone? What if you're seen as difficult? What if things become awkward? So you swallow the discomfort and convince yourself it doesn't matter. But unspoken feelings don't disappear. They change form. Frustration turns inward. Energy drains faster. Motivation fades quietly. You may even begin to feel irritated by the very people you're trying to please. And that confusion hurts. Because you don't want to be resentful. You don't want to feel bitter. You just want things to feel fair. But fairness requires honesty. And honesty is the one thing niceness keeps postponing. Niceness doesn't stay at the office. It follows you into friendships, into relationships, into the spaces where you're supposed to feel most at ease. You listen more than you speak. You adjust more than you ask. You sense what others need and quietly put it first. At first, this feels like love, like loyalty, like being emotionally mature. You become the one people vent to, the one who understands, the one who never makes things about themselves. But slowly, something shifts. Your feelings become optional. Your needs feel like interruptions. Your silence is mistaken for agreement. You tell yourself it's not a big deal, that relationships require compromise, that being easygoing keeps things peaceful. And maybe it does, for everyone else. Because while you're busy holding space, no one is holding it for you. And the imbalance grows so gradually that by the time you notice it, it feels normal. Avoiding conflict feels like peace, at least on the surface. There are no raised voices, no uncomfortable conversations, no risk of saying the wrong thing. Everything stays calm. But calm doesn't always mean healthy. When difficult conversations are avoided, they don't disappear. They get postponed. Unspoken feelings begin to stack quietly. Small disappointments are ignored. Minor boundaries are crossed and forgiven without ever being discussed. Over time, this silence creates distance. You may find yourself pulling back emotionally, not because you want to, but because staying open feels exhausting. There's a strange loneliness that forms here. You're surrounded by people, yet you feel unseen. Not because others don't care, but because they don't know what you've never said. And the longer conflict is avoided, the harder it becomes to speak at all. Because now it's not just one issue, it's a history. And niceness once again steps in, not to protect you, but to keep everything exactly as it is. It's rarely dramatic. There's no argument, no shouting, no clear turning point anyone else would notice. It might happen in a meeting when your idea is ignored and later repeated by someone else. Or in a relationship when a decision is made without asking you because it was assumed you'd be fine. Or in a family moment when your needs are once again placed last, not out of cruelty, but out of habit. And suddenly, something clicks. You realize that being nice has not protected your time, your energy, or your place. You've been accommodating for so long that others no longer see accommodation. They see permission. And the hardest part isn't the situation itself. It's the realization that no one is intentionally hurting you. They're simply responding to the version of yourself you've shown them. That understanding hurts more than anger ever could. Because now the question changes. It's no longer, why do people treat me this way? It becomes, why have I allowed it for so long? After that moment of realization, the mind doesn't rush to answers. It pauses, not in anger, not in blame, but in confusion. Because if being nice isn't working, then why does it feel so impossible to stop? Why does speaking up feel more frightening than being overlooked? Why does the thought of disappointing others create more anxiety than disappointing yourself? These questions don't arrive all at once. They surface slowly, often late at night when everything is quiet enough to hear them. You begin to notice a pattern. You don't just avoid conflict with others, you avoid it within yourself. You sense what you want, then quickly talk yourself out of it. You minimize your needs, you explain away your discomfort. You convince yourself that asking for more would somehow be wrong. And the most uncomfortable realization is this: you're not being forced to live this way. You're choosing it, not consciously, but consistently. That understanding is unsettling because it means the problem isn't outside of you. And it also means the solution won't be either. At first, it's uncomfortable to admit, because fear doesn't fit the image most people have of themselves. Being nice feels generous. Being understanding feels mature. Being accommodating feels kind. Fear, on the other hand, feels weak. But when you look closely, fear is often the quiet engine beneath niceness. Not fear of danger, fear of rejection, fear of being misunderstood, fear of being seen as difficult, fear of losing approval. So instead of risking disapproval, you soften your words. You delay your needs. You tell yourself it's not important. And in the moment, that fear feels justified. Because niceness works, at least in the short term. It keeps things smooth. It avoids awkward conversations. It preserves harmony. But what it also does is teach your nervous system something powerful. That your safety depends on other people's comfort. And once that belief settles in, being honest begins to feel dangerous, even when it's necessary. After years of being nice, it stops feeling like something you do. It becomes who you are. You're the understanding one, the calm one, the person who never makes things difficult. Others come to expect it, and in many ways, so do you. So when the idea of change appears, it doesn't feel empowering. It feels threatening. Because if you stop being the nice one, who are you then? The thought of setting boundaries creates guilt before it creates relief. You imagine disappointing people. You imagine awkward silences. You imagine versions of yourself that don't feel familiar anymore. And familiarity is comforting, even when it's painful. So, instead of changing, you explain yourself. You say things like, "That's just how I am. I don't want to cause problems. It's easier this way." Not realizing that these explanations aren't descriptions of personality, they're defenses. And the longer an identity is defended, the harder it becomes to step outside it, even when staying inside it hurts. Most people don't wake up intending to take advantage of anyone. They don't plan to ignore boundaries. They don't consciously decide to be unfair. They simply respond to what's allowed. When someone never says no, requests feel safe to make. When someone never pushes back, assumptions form quietly. Over time, behavior adjusts, not because of bad intentions, but because patterns go unchallenged. And this is where many people get stuck. They wait for others to notice. They hope for understanding. They expect fairness to appear on its own. But human behavior doesn't work that way. People learn how to treat you based on what you tolerate, not what you feel. Silence teaches as much as words do, and repeated silence becomes permission. This realization can feel unfair at first, but it's also freeing, because it means the situation isn't fixed, it's flexible. And flexibility begins the moment something changes. For a long time, being liked feels like success. People smile when they see you. They feel comfortable around you. They rarely complain. And that feels good. But liking is fragile. It depends on convenience. It lasts only as long as things stay easy. Respect is different. Respect doesn't require constant agreement. It doesn't disappear when you set limits. In fact, it often grows when you do. The difficult truth is that many people confuse the two. They protect being liked even when it costs them respect. They say yes to avoid discomfort. They stay quiet to preserve harmony. They trade clarity for approval. But approval doesn't protect time. It doesn't protect energy, and it doesn't protect self-worth. Respect does. And respect begins the moment your words align with your limits, even if that alignment feels uncomfortable at first. The first time you don't say yes, it doesn't feel empowering. It feels awkward. Your voice hesitates. Your heart beats faster. Your mind immediately looks for ways to soften what you've said. You might apologize even when you've done nothing wrong. You might explain yourself too much, as if permission is required. And afterward, guilt shows up. Not because the boundary was unkind, but because it was unfamiliar. For someone who has spent years being agreeable, assertiveness feels like selfishness, even though it isn't. Discomfort is often mistaken for wrongdoing, but discomfort is simply the sign that an old pattern is being interrupted. Others may react with surprise. Some may test the boundary. Some may step back. And that reaction can feel frightening. But it's also revealing, because it shows who was benefiting from the old version of you, and who is willing to meet you with respect. Not everyone reacts well to change. When you stop over-explaining, when you stop always being available, some people notice. And their reaction isn't always supportive. They may seem distant, less warm, less enthusiastic. It can feel like punishment. And for someone who has relied on approval for safety, that shift hurts. You may question yourself, wonder if you were too harsh. Consider going back to the old version of you just to restore the familiar comfort. This is where many people give up. Not because boundaries are wrong, but because losing approval feels like loss. But there's something important happening beneath that discomfort. You're no longer performing for acceptance. You're choosing honesty over harmony. And while some connections weaken, others quietly improve. Conversations become clearer. Expectations become more balanced. Your energy stops leaking in every direction. What fades is approval. What grows is self-respect. Over time, something unexpected happens. Saying no becomes quieter, clearer, less emotional. You no longer feel the need to justify every choice. You don't rush to explain your boundaries. You trust that your clarity is enough. And kindness doesn't disappear. It changes. You still listen. You still care. But you no longer abandon yourself in the process. Kindness becomes intentional, not automatic. You help when you can, not when you're afraid. You speak honestly, not to create conflict, but to prevent resentment. And the difference is felt immediately. Relationships become simpler. Work feels more sustainable. Your energy begins to return. Not because life is easier, but because you're no longer fighting yourself. Life doesn't suddenly become perfect. There are still misunderstandings, still uncomfortable moments, still days when clarity feels difficult. But something important changes. You no longer carry the quiet weight of unsaid words. You don't replay conversations late at night, wondering what you should have said differently. Your yes means something now. Your no does too. Time feels more honest. Energy feels more contained. Relationships feel less draining. You begin to notice how much space niceness once occupied in your mind, how much effort it took to keep everyone comfortable. And with that space freed, you start to hear yourself more clearly. Not louder, not aggressively, just clearly. And that clarity brings something many people miss for years: peace that doesn't depend on other people's approval. If you've stayed with this story until now, it likely touched something personal. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was familiar. Being nice is not a flaw. Caring is not a weakness. But when kindness is driven by fear, it slowly turns against the person offering it. This story was never about changing who you are. It was about noticing why you do what you do. Because the moment you understand that, choice returns. And with choice comes balance. As you move forward, there's a simple question worth carrying with you. When you say yes, is it coming from honesty or from fear of discomfort? You don't have to answer it out loud. Just notice it when the moment arrives. Thank you for spending this time with an amazing storyteller. If this story felt familiar, you're welcome to share what stood out to you in the comments. And if you'd like more calm, real-life stories like this, you can subscribe and join us again. Until next time, Take care of yourself with the same kindness you've always offered others.